Hey folks, Coach Patrick here from Endurance Nation, and I'd like to talk to you guys today a little bit about measuring, about grading and quantifying yourself. Inside Endurance Nation, we do a great deal of work that's measurable. We test you frequently. We want to know how much you weigh. We want to know your functional threshold on the bike if you have a power meter. I want to know your lactate threshold on the bike or the run. If you use a heart rate monitor, I want to know your VDOT, your pace at threshold on the run. I want to know a lot about you, and that is evidence in how our people talk. For new members who show up, which we've had a bunch recently, thank you. There's a lot of acronyms and shorthand being thrown around in the community, and part of it is our culture of measuring. And that culture is very important, but has a double-edged sword for a lot of people. And I want to talk about that nature today. I think it's very important that you're able to measure yourself, no matter what you do. Being a triathlete or where you work or how you live your life, having a sense of where you are now, where you started, and where you want to go is very important in terms of actually getting somewhere. If you don't measure it, I think the infamous Peter Drucker once said, you can't manage it. And so measuring that data is so important. But when you get into the nature of measuring all that data, you absolutely start to run the risk of over-managing. And that is the inherently difficult part about actually measuring your data. So the classic example would be someone's trying to lose a couple pounds. They start weighing themselves, and they weigh themselves on Monday morning at 8 o'clock. And then they do a good job of eating that week, and they go back the next week and they measure again, and they've lost a pound. They're excited. They're kind of really excited. So instead of waiting another week, they weigh themselves again on Wednesday, only 2 days later. And they don't really see a difference. They're kind of concerned, so they go back and they weigh themselves on Thursday, and they see a little bit of a difference, and then they weigh themselves on Friday, and they don't see a difference again, so they weigh themselves on Friday night, and it looks a little bit better if they weigh themselves on Saturday morning, and the next thing you know, you're measuring and testing yourself all the time in a way that's not necessarily beneficial. Now, of course, it depends on the metric that you're measuring and how frequently you measure it. That's important. Something like your weight, once a week, same time, same conditions is certainly optimal. Something like your functional threshold power or your functional threshold pace, once a month is pretty good. You have a very relative sense from other metrics in terms of how things are going, and that's what's important. So you may weigh yourself once a week, but you can tell by the jeans that you wear or how you're eating, the type of food you've been consuming, or how you feel once you get really in tune with your diet, roughly how well you're doing. You become better attuned to how you're doing. Same thing with power and pace. The more that you train with power, you know your functional threshold. If you go out and you start riding it at 85% of that threshold or 90%, you become very hyper aware of how close or how not close you are to that high-end metric, because you spend a lot of time in and around that number. You're very focused in on that area. In other words, you don't need to measure that number exactly to have a pretty good sense of how you're doing overall. Same thing, imagine socially. If you're trying to be a better parent, you can check in with your kids or do some self-assessments every once in a while. But you have a pretty good sense at the end of every day, sort of how you feel, in your stomach, in your chest, about how you were with your kids today. And you don't need to do a major overhaul or test to get that sense. It's very easy to kind of check in. So the process of measuring is very important to understand your journey, where you are, where you've come from, where you're going. It's also important because it helps you develop a targeted skill set around understanding your progress on a micro level, not related to those benchmarks. Like learning a foreign language, you might only learn a couple words, but because you're learning those words, you pick up the accent, you pick up the rhythm, you're able to learn a little bit more because you're in that space. So measuring puts you in that space of understanding where you are progression-wise. But everything good comes with another side, and that dark side in the measuring spectrum is over-measuring, over-testing, basing how you feel about your fitness, basing how you feel about your tri lifestyle, your fitness lifestyle around these metrics, and you're not a happy triathlete if you have a bad test, but you're a very happy triathlete if you have a good test. Understand the limitations of those tests, use them to your advantage, and ultimately try and come up with core metrics that really matter for you. So they may be seasonal. In our case, inside Endurance Nation, right now it's the out season. everyone is focused on power and pace at threshold. That's it. You have a couple stragglers left doing those races. Stay strong, people. For Cozumel, Florida, and Arizona, even some Clearwater folks. And you people are at the very tail end of your year. You're focused on something very different than just your power threshold. You're focused on execution. For other people, they may be focused on body composition as a goal. Focus in on some key elements for you. Identify 3 or 4 items that you can keep track of, and just focus on those items for a month. Give yourself a month where you kind of focus on it, pay attention to it. It becomes part of your skill set. It becomes part of who you are as an athlete, as a person, as an individual, as a worker. And you can then move forward and start to focus on other elements, build out that kind of 360 nature of your understanding, your repertoire. And you don't necessarily need to keep testing those other areas because they've already become integrated into who you are. So as you move forward, the thought for today is, how can you measure what you're doing? How can you get a sense for your progress or lack thereof? And then how can you implement that measurement on a consistent scale for roughly about 4 weeks? Give yourself some time to focus on it, and then move on, check your progress, put it into your routine, and go out there, dominate. It's all part of building an outstanding 2010 season for you guys, and we're all about it. Thanks for tuning in today, folks. Have a great weekend. Coach Patrick signing off for Friday. Take it easy.